All right there, everyone. Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban is claiming that the upcoming EU debate on Hungary is nothing more than what he calls a George Soros-type seance. That's what we'll be talking about on today's video. But first, a warm welcome to all of our first-time viewers. I post 2 videos a day analyzing current events in light of some pretty awesome conservative trends. So if you would, please smack that bell and subscribe button. It'd be an absolute privilege to have you as a regular part of this channel. Also, for everyone, our Subscribestar platform is finally up and running, so please click on the link below. Become a supporter of our channel, as well as a patriot for free speech through Subscribestar. All right, so we have Viktor Orban once again calling out George Soros and his inordinate influence over the bureaucrats in the EU. In a recent radio interview, Orban was asked about the upcoming debate scheduled in the European Parliament on the rule of law in Hungary. And Soros basically dismissed the whole thing as a nonsensical farce and what he called this George Soros-type seance. He said it's basically an election rally. It's nothing more than a campaign event for these bureaucrats. What he's getting at here, if you're not familiar, the European Parliament took the unprecedented step a few months back to initiate what's called the Article 7 process against the nation of Hungary, which if it goes all the way, I don't think it will, but if it does go all the way, it would effectively strip Hungary of its voting rights in the EU Assembly. The article had never been previously invoked. 448 bureaucrats voted in favor of the measure. 197 voted against it. 48 abstained. Now, the vote involved accepting what's called the Sargentini report, which was authored by a far left-wing bureaucrat named Judith Sargentini, which documents the supposed democratic abuses of Hungary and calls for the implementation of Article 7. So the report cited things like Hungary's crackdown on George Soros and a Central European university as infringements against academic freedom. They cited cases of violating the line of separation between legislature and judiciary. And of course, they cited Hungary's refusal to take in its share of the immigration and refugee quota dictated by Brussels. The Hungarian Foreign Minister Peter Szijjártó called the adopting of the Sargentini report really is nothing more than just petty revenge by these pro-migration politicians. And he pointed out that the whole thing was basically null and void since it was passed through the breaching of the voting rules of the European Parliament, since normally abstentions are counted as votes against adopting the report, which they weren't. Now, the irony in this whole procedure was not lost on our good old Nigel Farage, the mastermind behind the successful Brexit campaign. He was there for the vote. And we should note, Farage stood up and gave an impassioned speech on behalf of Viktor Orban, and he noted the painful irony that the very bureaucrats who were faulting Hungary for not acting in accordance with democratic values have not themselves been elected. They are appointed bureaucrats accountable to no citizen, to no voter, to no nation. They're accountable to no populace whatsoever. And he pointed out that this really was nothing more than a kangaroo court. The verdict had already been reached. The court was just there to find something ex post facto to justify the previously reached verdict. And so this week, the European Commission, which is the next administrative body to decide what to do next with this Article 7 process, they've scheduled a debate in Brussels, one of the many more to come, to discuss the process of invoking Article 7. And Orban is openly accusing the Vice President of the European Commission, this Frans Timmermans, who, remember, is appointed, not elected, right? An appointed bureaucrat is leading a discussion on Hungary's democracy. Just let that hit you. But Orban is openly accusing Timmermans of being in George Soros's pocket. He calls him Soros's man, right? Timmermans and Soros did, in fact, meet back in November of last year. And as I understand it, I believe Soros is helping to fund Timmermans' candidacy for the position of president of the next European Commission after the May elections. But given that the nationalist populists are expected to absolutely storm and blow out those elections, I don't think we have to worry about that very much. But nevertheless, that's what Orban is getting at. Timmermans is completely in the billionaire Soros's pockets, and that this debate that was going to be happening this week was little more than just an election rally for the upcoming European parliamentary elections in May. In fact, for Orban, This rather close, open, this relationship between Soros and Timmermans meant that Soros is really not even hiding his ambitions regarding the European Union anymore. He's openly trying to take over major European institutions and operate them fully in favor of an open globalist society. And the EU is responding accordingly. Orban noted that the European Parliament decided recently to triple the funding of Soros' NGOs. What do you know? His web of non-governmental organizations under the umbrella of this Open Society Foundation. This is what's known as the SOROS plan, which Orban campaigned against during last year's national election in April, if I recall, when Orban won in a massive landslide his third straight term. The SOROS plan involves Soros' attempt at getting the European Union to pump mass amounts of money into these left-wing education and NGOs under the guise that such funding would counter the rise of nationalist, populist, and traditionalist parties all over Europe. And so organizations such as the Civil Liberties Union for Europe, the Open Society, European Policy Institute, all these others, they're all funded by Soros, and they're getting hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars of taxpayer funds going to support these NGOs that will promote progressive values and policies throughout the European Union. And they basically sold it from the vantage point that if you want the EU to survive, you're going to have to counter this nationalist populist insurgency that's going on all over the place. But the only way you're going to be able to effectively counter this nationalist insurgency is if you support these NGOs and media outlets that promote left-wing globalist and secular propaganda. And now it appears that Soros was quite successful in getting these funds. This is precisely what Orban was warning about. And it's not just Orban. Look, you know, the constant refrain from liberal globalists is that all of this criticism of Soros is nothing more than good old-fashioned bigoted anti-Semitism, right? You heard that, right? But I'm sure you're well aware, perhaps the single most vocal international opponent of George Soros is none other than Bibi Netanyahu, the prime minister of Israel. He's, in fact, backed Hungary's opposition of George Soros. You know, Soros is pushing this whole thing of human rights organizations in Israel, and they're accusing Netanyahu of all kinds of human rights abuses. So Netanyahu has no time of day for Soros. Now, in many ways, I think this is just the last hurrah for Soros. And I'm not just talking about his age. I'm talking more from the vantage point that the world really is increasingly rejecting his globalist vision. Soros is finding himself more and more, I'm sure you know, getting kicked out of countries. Soros and his Open Society Foundation, they were banned from Russia, right? They've been banned from Hungary. They've recently been banned from Turkey. They got kicked out of Pakistan. I mean, the list just keeps growing and growing. More and more nations want nothing to do with Soros's radical left-wing globalism that assaults national sovereignty and cultural identity. And Orban's calling out of Soros has been recently echoed by Nigel Farage, who exposed right in the middle of the European Parliament the collusion between Soros and a number of bureaucrats who have been bought and paid for by the Open Society Foundations. We featured that video on our channel. So this is not even remotely controversial at this point. It is now widely admitted that Soros does indeed invest heavily, not just in civil society campaigns that push pro-EU propaganda, but that he actively funds the leaders of European institutions in an effort to control those very institutions. So I think this is all really just the last gasp to try in desperation to thwart the inevitable storming of Brussels by the nationalist populists throughout Europe in the upcoming European parliamentary elections in May. And that will most likely be the end of much of Soros's activity in Brussels and by extension throughout much of the world. As always, please like, comment, and subscribe. Click on either our Patreon subscribe star or PayPal links below. Become a supporter of this channel and help us to continue to analyze current events in light of awesome conservative trends so that you can personally and professionally flourish. God bless.